take you to the Phineas T. Have-Not Memorial Library, where the community librarian, Fanny Faithful, is valiantly trying to build a useful collection of books for her community. Bursting into the library with benevolence and good intentions is Mrs. Arthur P. Abernathy.
Good morning.
Well, hello. May I help you?
No, Fanny, I'm here to help you.
Well, that's nice. What did you have in mind?
I have here a box of valuable books that I want to donate to the library in the name of my dear departed husband.
Well, Mrs. Abernathy, why don't you have a seat? That sounds very good. Maybe I could explain to you the policies and procedures of the Have-Not Library when it comes to gifts. First of all, our library is very grateful for the gifts we receive because, as you know, our budget is very limited. And from time to time, the books we receive really help fill some large gaps in our collection. On the other hand, we're always careful to tell our gift givers that perhaps not all of the books they give us will be useful in our community.
What? You mean these books might not stay on the Have-Not collection?
Well, perhaps not all of them, and maybe you'd like to explore some of the reasons why. And maybe you'd like to explore some of the reasons why, too. Hi, and welcome to the 8th broadcast of Community Library Training. I'm not Fanny Faithful, I'm Sheila Fuhrer, and as many of you know, this is not Mrs. Arthur P. Abernathy, this is Nancy Abona, the assistant librarian at the Juneau Memorial Library. Now, Nancy and I have spent some time trying to gather together for you a kind of program that will at last answer your need when it comes to weeding and gifts and things like that. So what we've done, as you might guess, is take the small library pamphlet that we have been referring to. I think you have it now. It's actually called Weeding the Small Library Collection, and we're going to use that more or less as our guideline. We've also taken time to make some notes about the kinds of things we wanted to be sure we mentioned when we talked about weeding and collection building. And Nancy, I think the first thing that we got into was why weeding, and I love the word because it's pretty literal, isn't it? You've had experience. Why do we weed in the first place?
Well, I think one of the most major reasons for weeding is because you lack space. Your shelves are crowded. The new books are lost because you have all these old, frayed books. And I think that's the most important reason.
We've listed a few, and you mentioned the frayed books. Another reason that is often mentioned is that often the materials, even if they're in good condition, are outdated, you know,
right,
in content. And you mentioned something to me that had come up in your experience in weeding, which you've apparently had quite a bit of experience recently. I know you went to Skagway, and you've also just been through a procedure at Juneau Memorial. What was that one that you said that kind of surprised you once you got into it?
Well, I thought that one of the really valuable reasons for weeding is that you handle each book in your collection, and you look at it and you evaluate it, and you look at the books in that subject area as a whole, and you can see where your weaknesses are, what subjects you haven't covered in your library, and you can see maybe weeding should always go along with book selection, and you can see your own biases, how they have developed in the collection, and how you have maybe selected a lot of books in history or literature and not very many in photography or gardening or something. And I think it points out the holes in your collection, the places where you need to do some more book selection.
Right. Okay, we also know that one of the reasons I think that maybe the students have asked for this as a topic is because there are some problems with weeding. And I kind of outlined what they were. And I guess the first one that sometimes makes us uncomfortable is in the whole area of public opinion. In that if the public doesn't understand, how can that librarian be requesting more tax monies when here, as a matter of fact, she's, you know, throwing materials away? And actually, you know, what about the fact that some of these books seem to be in perfect condition, and there we get into the issue of whether or not the contents are outdated. There's another one that makes us a little self-conscious too, and that is, if these books weren't used enough in the first place to be worn out, didn't someone make a mistake, you know, by buying them in the first place? And I guess my answer to that would be, admit that maybe we didn't call the shots in terms of what was going to be useful in our community. We don't always get to see the books before we order them, so that, you know, that's a concern. It's interesting too that some of the problems with weeding don't really, the responsibility isn't necessarily on the public side, but kind of on the librarian side. Have you ever heard anyone point to a really outdated collection of materials and tell you with a great deal of pride how many volumes they had? As if, you know, just simple numbers of volumes were any kind of mark of excellence. And I've heard that from time to time, and I know that's something that can't really very well be defended. There's always that faint possibility that something we throw away or pass on to another library is going to somehow be used. And that's one that kind of bothers us. And toward the end of our discussion, Nancy and I are going to talk about the various ways that we can pass materials on and so forth that might ease their minds a little bit in that. Who would you say, Nancy, is the most qualified person to weed a library, you know, a collection in a local library?
I think the most qualified person is the librarian, or the people who have been working with the library, because they know the collection. They also know their community. It's very important to know your community when you're weeding for various reasons, to know what sort of books they like, who's taking out the books. Sometimes you run across a book that you forgot was there, and you'll say, aha, this book would Mr. Abernathy may really enjoy this book, and he's probably never seen that. That's another thing when you're reading, is you find that a book may be stuck down in the corner, and maybe you've given it a call number that really, you know, it might get more use somewhere else. Yeah.
I think you mentioned that you've learned that it was an awful lot easier somehow. There was more confidence when you were weeding in teams, too.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Somehow it helps to be able to bounce your doubts off of someone else, and back and forth and balance
each other out. It's more fun that way. You get to discuss the books and as you say, bounce them off. Get two people's opinion. You feel more self-confident about it.
We also said we were going to make a point out of saying, when do you weed? And I think we decided there are really two ways. And you recommended, what was the first you recommended?
I recommended systematic weeding, and that really worked better for us at Juneau. We just took areas, specific areas, and went through them book by book.
Like breaking it down by the hundreds in the Dewey Decimal System, right?
Yeah, we went through the fiction first, and then we started backwards and went through the 900s, and then just went around the room.
That's sometimes good, because the 900s are so comprehensive. Yeah. If they're always ahead of you, it's easier to start and get them out of the way, isn't it? And I think the other time we would mention, you know, to weed would be the time when you're physically handling the book. And if the book is rat-tailed, or if someone's coffee has been spilled on it, or those, you can also make a pretty easy decision with the materials as you're actually handling them. Well, Mrs. Abernathy, my dear, you have actually brought some physical examples of books, and in the interest of getting our discussion to a very practical level, which our students have time and again asked for, we've kind of loaded the deck here a little bit, because we put in some examples of types of books, and we'll just kind of take them really one at a time to indicate the kinds of considerations that we would go through. And I'm going to pick, we'll just trade off picking one and another. I have a book here called The Good Housekeeping's Complete Wedding Guide, which isn't terribly bad as a basic topic to start with, but we determined from the inside, and I'm looking now at copyright date, and it said it was copyrighted in 1957. Well, I don't know of many conscientious brides who really want to get married today by 1957 standards, and just to be double sure, even though, you know, I'm not sure I can afford a new one, I think what my guideline says here is, in etiquette and customs, keep only basic, up-to-date materials. So, Mrs. Abernathy, I'm sorry, we probably won't be keeping that one.
I chose this Opportunities in Chiropractic Careers, And this is another area where it's good to keep up-to-date information, because people, when they're looking for a job or deciding on a career, want the most up-to-date information. And I think probably this looks old. I haven't checked the copyright. It's 1967, but still that's several years ago. And I think it would definitely be one that could go.
Career material is often handled really the best in a vertical file because it outdates itself so quickly. You just barely get the book in and get a catalog. Okay, well, let's keep on moving through this and see what we get. Aha, Mrs. Abernathy probably didn't mean for this one to be in there. The title of this book, and I don't know, it's maybe a little too shiny to show, this is Dan Rather's and Paul Gates's new book called The Palace Guards. And this is the title that you've probably been hearing discussed on radio and television. It's being reviewed in journals. And it's called A Fascinating Behind-the-Scenes Account of the Nixon Administration and the Men Who Ran the Country Before Watergate Brought Them Down. Well, needless to say, this is a very high current interest and would be a book that we would really be delighted to add to our collection immediately. And so Mrs. Abernathy scored when she included that one. I should make a point about political books, however, that you and I mentioned earlier, and that is when we weed, and we're looking back at the collection, when we get into the area of politics and current affairs, I think we've used the word weed drastically. No one wants to read today about what the United States should do in Korea. Somehow no one is reading that. Political biographies and so forth of times, times past are going to be dead. They're going to stay on the shelf. But here's one we'll be delighted to keep.
This book is Reducer's Cookbook. And you might think that cookbooks were always of value, but this is a 1950 date. And I think probably nutritional information has changed since then. A lot of new information has come out, and that this is another one that could go. I'm
going to read the rule, home economics. Discard dated information, especially in sewing and grooming books. Replace unattractive cookbooks. Replace if they're still in demand.
That's a good point about that book,
if they're still in demand. Yeah. Okay, what else do we have here? Oh, it's a children's book called Danny Driver. And it says right on the cover that this costs 69 cents. And I can see from inside that it's a Golden Press book. And it's only been used maybe slightly. This is an example of a book, Nancy, I think you and I were talking about this, because of the nature of the way the book was printed and the way it was bound. It is not going to hold up. And nothing is more tragic than devoting the time and expense of cataloging it and assigning it to the spine label, doing the pocket and the card, getting the cards in the catalog, have it go out 3 times and it decomposes. It really falls apart. I guess what I would say to do with books like this, that it still have some value, would be to look around your community and see if maybe there isn't something like maybe a dentist's office or a clinic or a doctor's office where children are asked to wait. We really can't afford to spend the time and the money to add to our collection, and yet it has utility. It really shouldn't be thrown away.
This is another example of where the librarian's knowledge of the community comes in, because you should know these places where books will be worthwhile, other than the library. Here's a book, Working with Tools for Fun and Profit. It's the same thing. It's old, and it's probably not as attractive as other books. It's 1937, and there are more modern books. If you don't have anything on some of these subjects, for instance, on carpentry or something, you should be looking for newer books that you can buy, and this is where you look at your collection critically and find other books to buy that would replace this one.
That one isn't going to make it, is it?
No.
Not all books published in 1937 are automatically not useful, but as you said, the chances of materials changing, tools changing, and techniques even changing. Okay, what else did you bring us? Okay, I have here a book that's in really very good condition. In fact, it looks nearly new, and it's called A History of Chinese Philosophy. But it also says, Volume 1, The Period of the Philosophers. Obviously, it's a sophisticated book on Chinese philosophy. It is volume 1 of a 2-volume set, which would indicate to us that maybe what she's given us here is something that we should pass on to another library. After all, we're assuming that our community is small. We want to make sure that everything we put on the shelf has maximum opportunity for being used. And I would guess, would you agree this would be something we would pass on to a larger library, a research or a reference library? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a valuable book, but it's not one that we're going to keep ourselves.
Secrets of the Zone Press. I wish you'd gotten this one. Yeah, she'll like this one. You're probably wondering what the Zone Press is. What the Zone Press is, it's a basketball book, and that's a certain type of basketball maneuver.
It's a technique. You bet
technique.
It is.
And this book, didn't you say, when you look at a book, look at it critically, find out what it's about. And I remember you talking about this one and saying that a lot of it was about kind of a biography of the coach who wrote the book, who is now long forgotten. And probably basketball technology has changed, perhaps. And although we know that basketball is very big in Alaska, this book is old.
It might be an insult almost to the team and the local coach to have something that old on the shelf, mightn't it? Okay, here's another one that I loaded the deck with because, you know, if you look at this really like it is right now, I hope you can see that it is slightly warped, and I hope you can see that it's kind of a ratty color, and it's definitely tattered and falling apart. Now, we might say to ourselves, well, it looks pretty grody, but the inside is still valuable. Obviously, the book has been read heavily. It is the Associated Press's publication called Footprints on the Moon. And it's filled with really beautiful color photos. However, the book is falling apart. The pages are coming out. And this is going to be one of those, I really hate to do it, but let's face it, we need a new copy of the same title. Obviously, it's been popular. Obviously, it's still of interest, but this particular copy has seen its day. So it's a reorder situation if it's that valuable.
And you were saying, weren't you, that you could keep the old book on the shelves until the new book comes in?
It's been my experience, right, with library staff that didn't want to get rid of the old one. They used to say, oh, Sheila, please let me keep this copy of Dr. Seuss until the new one comes, or maybe it would be Footprints on the Moon until the new one comes. So go ahead and keep the old one on there, on the shelf until the new one's in.
This is a book of Pearl Buck's Mandala, and the point we wanted to bring up about fiction is that a lot of authors write hundreds of books, and your library does not have to keep every single edition or every single volume. You can keep the most popular ones, and what you can do with the others is send them to the Alaska Book Depository, and there they will be always available for you when someone does come in and says they want to read Mandala, and you say, well, we have these other books by Pearl Buck, but we don't have that one. You can always order this one through interlibrary loan.
Right. We have all had the experience with a patron who says, I want to read everything that Edna Ferber ever wrote, or everything that Herman Wouk ever wrote, and if the library is as small as the Have-Not Memorial Library, we know we can't afford, in dollars and in space, to have every one of that particular author's run, especially if they've been writing for many years. Pearl Buck is a good example. We can always borrow. We can always borrow. So only the most critical, or the ones that are most currently being read. Well, we're getting down to the bottom. Here, this may really turn out to be my most favorite book, because when I read it, I truly didn't know what it was. I read it out loud to you, and you didn't know what it was. It says photo oil coloring for fun or profit. Photo oil coloring. Okay, it really is. Remember when? This is a photography book, when photographers were forced to take black and white photos and then actually touch them up. I don't have to say any more about this, do I? This book definitely is dated, and I just to look at what it says here. Keep basic material, keep them attractive and up to date. In photography, it says discard all information that is 5 years old or older. I'm not even going to look at the copyright date on that book. We know it's older than 5 years.
And the last one is a book on education, education of exceptional children and youth. Education is a discipline that changes practically every year, and it's something you would keep the historical volumes, but you would look at the use of this book. Has it been used? Is it a historical volume? Is it in the standard catalog? Have we brought that up yet?
Mentioned. How could we not have mentioned Public Library Catalog? This is this very weighty book called Public Library Catalog. It's a 73 edition. It's one that you have seen if you were able to attend the workshop. This is really the thing, even when there are two of us weeding, if we can rely on Public Library Catalog or a similar standard tool, somehow that even helps more.
You have a place to look it up. What we always do, maybe I could just say this, is that we open up the book, we look at its physical condition, we take out the card to see how well it has been used. When was the last date it was checked out? And then we look it up in the standard catalog, and those three things, really.
Okay, we're talking to community libraries, Nancy, who do not necessarily have this reference tool in their collection. However, as a matter of policy, the State Library does loan out copies of all of the standard tools, and without question, if any of our students are about to undertake the weeding process, we want them to ask for this particular thing. It tells us what we should reorder. It tells us what are the most basic books in certain parts of the collection and so forth. And without it, really, even if you've had a lot of experience, you kind of feel like you're at sea.
You can't know everything about every subject.
You can't know everything about every subject. And I guess a librarian who doesn't learn that the first few days on the job, and all you know is that you know less about what you know. One of the things that we did want to make sure that we would mention to the students is, what are we going to do with the materials? And the storage of little used materials and the access to little used materials is something that Alaska is just beginning to approach. And for your information, this is what we can do right now in Alaska. When you have gone through the weeding process and you've used these tools, or you've asked someone from the State Library staff to assist you, or wherever you are, if you are in a capacity that you can make a list, title, author, and publisher type list of the materials that you are withdrawing from your collection, and send those to William Smith, who is the acquisition librarian at the Elmer Rasmussen Library, University of Alaska in Fairbanks. They are going to begin to establish the depository last copy collection for Alaska there. And if you're really pressed for space, you can actually send the physical books. But of course, it's much more ideal to send a list to this staff, let them check it. They will respond then and let you know which of those materials that you're withdrawing they would like to have. And I think we were talking about what not to send. Well, obviously, you don't send books that are falling apart. And maybe the other guideline would be, if you're withdrawing some material from your collection because it's dated for your community and it's no longer valid for your community, then it's probably not really going to be that useful in another Alaskan community. Basically, I think that's kind of a guideline. Okay, we knew that we weren't going to have as much time as we wanted, and I'm looking at notes here that we didn't really get to mention. You mentioned something, Nancy, which you said standards for weeding should be based upon the selection policy. And you said that early on in the program, and I would go a step further and say, and the book selection policy, which we've been talking about with our students, really should have a statement about discarded materials. Okay, let me read a selected statement that you might just want to consider. Now, we're talking about the policy. And here's an example of one you might want to use. Materials which are no longer useful in light of the stated objectives of the library will be systematically weeded from the collection according to accepted professional practices. Now, that's the catalog and so forth. Such material will be destroyed. The library will not be guilty of lowering the standards of other institutions or individual collections by giving away soiled, damaged, mediocre, or obsolete materials, which is a pretty strong statement. If it's not good enough for the public, then it's not good enough for the children in the home for exceptional children, or it's not good enough for the convicts who are in the jail and so forth. If it's withdrawn, it goes really all over the way. Okay, we've just, you know, run out of time, Mrs. Abernathy. And what would be, I don't know, what would be your advice to someone who really hasn't weeded a collection right now? What would be the first thing that you would say to them?
I think it's a lot of fun, and I think you should go out there and enjoy it.
I can't believe that. She said that. She said she thinks it's fun, that you would really enjoy it. Nancy, thanks for coming today from Juneau Memorial, and thanks for being Mrs. Abernathy and going through some of the specific things. You and I mentioned in our first discussion that gee, there are a lot of areas that we have not really covered in this, or there are a lot of areas where we feel like we have just barely skimmed. And I think one of the things that I would mention to our students is, if you're involved in this process, and if you have doubt about the book, go ahead and include it in your list to the Rasmussen Library. If you have doubt about it, or you think it might have historical significance, keep it. When in doubt, go ahead and keep it. On the other hand, go ahead and get started, you know, and do it right away. Thanks very much, Nancy, and if possible, if they ask us to do this again, we may put ourselves back on and get into what to do with gifts with strings attached and so forth. So thanks a lot. Today was Nancy Abona, who very graciously came over to the studio. We taped the broadcast that you have just seen, and we have just a few moments for interaction. I'm going to hush and see if there's someone who would like to comment to us either on the program or anything else that's on their mind. Tana, now we read you.
I just want to tell you that this is exactly what we needed, and I really thank you.
Oh, great. I'm pleased to hear that. She said this is exactly what we needed. I'm sorry. Who am I talking to?
Oh, this is Luvia.
Great. Okay, Luvia. I hope that did help answer some of the questions. I'm pleased to hear that it does. And the public library catalog that we showed and mentioned to you, if you really want to get underway, that isn't the only tool that you know we can make available to you, but I have a feeling Mary Matthews is going to be very frustrated today, Luvia, because she is viewing the program in Fairbanks, but they don't have an audio. So I'll tell her that you and I have had this kind of a conversation, and we'll tell her that it was something that you really enjoyed.
One other thing, one particular problem we have here is sometimes we have an old book that I personally don't see any value in. Someone will say, well, what if the kids need to use it in a history course where they want a perspective, you know, from 1938 on a 1938 situation? And, you know, I'm dying to get rid of the old book, but people make me feel really insecure about it.
Okay, I think you have really touched upon something that goes through everyone's mind when they look at material in history and determine whether or not they should keep it. And my response to you is going to be brief, but I would say if the book simply represents a period in history that a researcher may want in time, go ahead and send it to the depository, and you can recall that particular book. And go and get rid of it unless it is something that is frequently requested. One of the guidelines that some libraries use is, has that material been requested within a year? It's almost like the way maybe a woman looks at her wardrobe. If I haven't worn that dress in 2 years, I'm probably not going to wear it. The same thing kind of works true with books in a collection too. But it's a good question. It's one we all go through.
Thank you.
You bet. One of the things I was going to mention in the broadcast was that the goal of our library collection is that it be alive, attractive, and useful. And I have just a few moments to tell you a very brief story about a time when we weeded maybe over 200 books from a tiny, tiny library collection. And the community didn't know if they really wanted it to happen. And the librarian, we almost did it in the middle of the night. After we had gone, the librarian called me and said, Sheila, I have the best news. And the boxes, the books were gone and being disposed of. She said, 6 times this week, The public has come into the library and said, wow, where did you get all of those new books? And not a new book had been added to the shelf. She said it made it worth her time, too. I'm getting signals from our crew that we're probably very near to being out of time, and just for the fun of it, we thought maybe we would make some final decisions with some of these materials.